He told the world he was dead, and everyone believed him. The funeral went on, the tears were real, and I was left alone. But one small clue made me realize he was alive. What he thought was the end was only the beginning of my revenge. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. One of those quiet nights where the house feels too still, and you promise yourself you'll sleep early. I remember checking the clock again and again, waiting for his call. He was late. Not unusual. But something in the silence felt heavier that night, like the air itself was holding its breath. The call finally came, but not from his number. A stranger's voice said my name slowly, carefully, as if preparing me for impact. He asked if I was his wife. Before I could answer properly, before my mind could catch up, he said the words that split my life into before and after. There had been an accident. A serious one. They were trying everything. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I only remember the sound of my own heartbeat pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. At the hospital, lights were too bright. People spoke too softly. Doctors avoided my eyes. Someone guided me into a chair I never chose to sit on. Then came the sentence they practiced saying, calm, rehearsed, empty. He didn't make it. Time froze, but the world didn't stop. That's the cruel part. The world keeps moving even when yours collapses. I screamed. I know I did because my throat burned for days after. I begged to see him. They told me it wasn't possible. His injuries were extensive. A closed casket would be best. That phrase haunted me. Best for whom? Certainly not for the woman who loved him, who needed proof that this nightmare was real. The funeral happened faster than my grief could process. Black clothes, sympathetic faces, hands on my shoulders whispering strength into my ears as if strength could be borrowed for a day. People cried more than I did. I felt empty, hollow, like someone had scooped my insides out and replaced them with silence. As the casket was lowered into the ground, I waited for something. A sign, a feeling of final goodbye. Nothing came. Just dirt hitting wood. Just finality. Or so everyone believed. They called me the poor widow. That word followed me everywhere. At the bank. At family gatherings. On condolence cards written in neat handwriting. Widow. As if my identity had been reduced to his absence. I learned how to nod, how to thank people, how to smile without feeling anything behind it. Nights were the worst. His side of the bed stayed cold. His clothes still smelled like him. I replayed our last conversation endlessly, searching for clues, for missed warnings. Had he sounded tired? Distant? Guilty? I blamed myself for not noticing whatever sign I was supposed to see. Then came the paperwork. Death certificates. Insurance forms. Endless signatures. Every document asked me to accept the same truth again and again. He was gone. I signed because that's what widows do. But a small, quiet voice inside me refused to grieve properly. It whispered questions I didn't yet understand. The first crack appeared when the insurance company delayed payment. They said they needed further verification. Accidents like this required additional review. I didn't think much of it at first. Systems are slow. Grief teaches you patience whether you want it or not. But then his phone buzzed. It was late. Almost midnight. I had kept his phone charged, unable to turn it off, as if keeping it alive somehow kept him alive too. The screen lit up, no message, no call, just a notification. Network signal. Active. My hand shook as I stared at it. Phones can glitch, I told myself. Technology does strange things. Grief makes you imagine patterns where none exist. I put the phone face down and tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come. Over the next few days, strange things stacked up quietly. His email showed a login alert from a different city. A joint account I hadn't touched showed a small withdrawal. Nothing dramatic, almost careful. Too careful. When I asked about it, I was told it must have been an automatic transaction set up earlier. Automatic. Convenient explanations everywhere. At the cemetery, I visited his grave for the first time alone. I stood there longer than I planned, waiting again for that feeling people talk about. Closure. Peace. Instead, I felt watched. Not by spirits or ghosts, by lies. I placed my hand on the fresh soil and whispered his name. My voice didn't shake. That scared me more than tears would have. I realized something terrifying in that moment. Part of me didn't believe he was under that ground. Everyone else had accepted his death. I was expected to move on slowly, quietly, gracefully. To rebuild as a widow. To mourn a man who, according to every document, no longer existed. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a thought settled into my mind with chilling calm. If he was truly dead, why did his life refuse to end? And if he wasn't, then the man I married hadn't just left me. He had erased himself. That was the night my grief began to change shape. Not into healing, but into awareness. And awareness, I would later learn, is far more dangerous than sorrow. The days after the funeral were supposed to be about healing. That's what everyone said. Take it one day at a time. Be kind to yourself. Let time do its work. But time didn't soften anything for me. It sharpened it. Every hour that passed made the silence louder, the unanswered questions heavier. I stayed in the house longer than I should have. People suggested I travel, stay with family, change my surroundings. I nodded and ignored them. Something inside me insisted I stay exactly where everything had happened, as if leaving would mean missing a clue I didn't yet know I was looking for. His belongings became evidence without me realizing it. I didn't touch them at first. Then one afternoon, driven by restlessness more than courage, I opened his closet. Everything was perfectly arranged just as he liked it. Too perfect. Nothing missing. Not even the watch he wore every single day. If he'd known he was going to die, wouldn't he have worn it? The thought felt ridiculous, and yet it stayed. I started noticing how carefully the story of his death had been packaged for me. The accident report was brief, vague. It described chaos, damage, circumstances that made identification difficult. Conveniently difficult. When I asked to see more details, I was told it would only cause me pain. People are generous with protection when they don't want you asking questions. The closed casket haunted me. Everyone accepted it without hesitation. I pretended to do the same. Grief gives you a mask, and I wore mine well. But at night, I replayed the funeral in my mind. I realized I had never actually seen proof. No face. No final image. Just words and signatures and sympathetic nods. One evening, while sorting through paperwork, I found his laptop. I hadn't turned it on since the night of the call. When I finally did, it asked for a password. I guessed the one I knew. Incorrect. I tried another. Incorrect again. He had changed it. Recently. The realization landed slowly, painfully. Why would a dead man need a new password? I didn't push further. Not yet. Instead, I closed the laptop and placed it back exactly where it had been. I was learning something important. Whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be rushed. Then there were the financial details. Small, nearly invisible movements. An account balance that didn't match my records. A subscription renewal paid just days after his death. Each time I asked, I was met with calm explanations. Automated systems. Delays. Errors. Words designed to end conversations. I stopped asking. At the grocery store, I caught myself turning around when I heard a familiar laugh. At red lights, I stared at reflections in rearview mirrors longer than necessary. I told myself this was grief. That's what grief does. It creates ghosts out of memories. But these weren't memories. They felt present. Active. One night I opened his phone again. This time I didn't turn it face down. I watched it. Minutes passed. Then hours. Just as I was about to give up, the screen lit up briefly. A notification banner appeared and disappeared before I could read it. But I had seen enough. It wasn't a system alert. It wasn't random. It was a message that I didn't chase it. I didn't unlock the phone. I simply placed it back on the nightstand and sat there, breathing slowly, forcing my hands to stop shaking. Panic would ruin everything. Whatever truth existed was fragile. I needed patience more than proof. People around me began to move on faster than I did. They talked about my future. About rebuilding. About life after him. They meant well, but every suggestion felt premature. As if they were encouraging me to close a door that hadn't truly shut. At the cemetery again, I noticed something strange. The soil hadn't settled the way fresh graves usually do. It was smooth. Undisturbed. Almost untouched. I told myself I was imagining it. But imagination doesn't usually come with this level of certainty. That certainty followed me home. I started a quiet routine. Observing. Noting. Remembering. I reread old messages between us, not for comfort but for patterns. Certain phrases stood out now. Casual jokes about disappearing, comments about starting over. At the time I'd laughed. Now they felt rehearsed. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to him. Not forwarded. Not redirected. Just his name, my address. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a generic notice. Nothing dramatic. But it proved something critical. According to some systems, he still existed. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. I barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked calmer, colder, focused. Grief had stopped being my dominant emotion. Suspicion had replaced it. If he was dead, too many things were alive that I finally allowed myself to think the unthinkable. Not as a fear but as a possibility. What if this wasn't an accident? What if his death wasn't a tragedy but a strategy? The thought didn't break me. It steadied me. Because if someone had gone to such lengths to vanish, it meant they were hiding from something. Or someone. And for the first time since the night of the call, I felt something other than loss. I felt alert. Whatever the truth was, it was close now. Not in some distant future, but just beyond the surface of everyday life disguised as normality. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If he had planned this carefully, then he had underestimated one detail. He had assumed grief would blind me. He was wrong. The next morning I woke up with a strange clarity. Grief had transformed into vigilance. Every sound, every message, every movement around me felt sharper, more significant. The world hadn't changed. I had. And that shift in perspective was dangerous for him once I found him. It started with small anomalies. A package delivered to my door addressed to him, but with no signature required. A hotel booking in a city neither of us had visited. Emails marked read that I hadn't opened. Little breadcrumbs almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. My stomach tightened every time I noticed them. Something was alive. Something he wanted me to miss. I began retracing his last known steps before the accident. I called his colleagues casually, asked about work projects, pretending to accept his death. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to upset me. But one name slipped, a location he had visited days before the accident. I memorized it, then waited. Late one night I decided to follow that lead. The address led to a small, unremarkable apartment. I watched it from a distance, hiding behind a parked car. First nothing happened. Then the door opened and I saw him. Alive. In the flesh. My husband. The man whose funeral I had attended. The man whose absence everyone mourned. Time froze. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. There he was, moving with the same easy grace, completely unaware I was watching. He looked different, older somehow, more careful, but unmistakably him. My mind raced. Questions collided with disbelief. Why? Why would he do this? Why fake his death? It didn't take long to put the pieces together. He had debts, hidden problems I never knew about, and perhaps a desire for freedom he couldn't claim while married. He had constructed an elaborate lie, using his death to erase himself from my life, from responsibilities, from the law, even from my existence. And he had assumed I would crumble, disappear, move on quietly. I felt the first pulse of anger. Not the kind that screams or throws things, but the quiet, cold kind that plans. That observes. That waits. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't imagined. And betrayal, I had learned, was meant to be punished. For days I watched him from a distance, noting his routines, his habits. Every gesture, every visit to a cafe, every smile at a stranger became data. The more I observed, the more I realized how much he underestimated me. He thought a funeral and a closed casket would end the story. He thought I would be a passive widow. He had no idea I was watching, learning, strategizing. Then came the moment I found proof, undeniable proof. Bank transactions, tickets in his name, photos posted online that he assumed I wouldn't see. Every piece was a confirmation of the lie, of his deliberate erasure. I collected them carefully, methodically. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about preparation, strategy, ensuring that when the time came I had all the cards. And as I sat alone in my apartment that night, reviewing everything I had gathered, a strange smile crossed my face. The same man who had faked his death to escape me had no idea what was coming. He didn't know I had learned his patterns, documented his every move, and understood his methods. I whispered to myself almost softly, a vow that carried more power than anger ever could. He faked his death to erase me, but he didn't realize. I've been alive, watching and waiting. That realization changed everything. The fear, the sorrow, the confusion, all replaced by clarity. I knew exactly what I needed to do. This wasn't a game of chance. It was a chessboard and he had made the first move. Now it was my turn. Over the next few days, I began quietly setting my plan in motion. Lawyers, private investigators, careful digital tracking. Every move I made was invisible, untraceable, and deliberate. The world saw a grieving widow, fragile and mourning. But beneath that facade, a storm was brewing. The twist, the shock, the betrayal, all of it had sharpened me. I had imagined myself powerless, but I wasn't. He had underestimated me, and that mistake would be his undoing. When the day came that I confronted him, it wouldn't be with tears or anger. It would be with precision, with evidence, with the quiet force of a woman who had survived betrayal and turned it into power. The man who had faked his death to escape me was about to realize a terrifying truth. I had never been gone. And now I was ready. The calm before the storm was the hardest part. I had discovered he was alive, that his death was nothing but a carefully crafted lie. Yet I could not act impulsively. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about patience, precision, and deception. I had to be invisible, the ghost in his life, while gathering everything I needed to destroy him. I started with appearances. I remained the grieving widow the world expected me to be. Friends, family, even neighbors all saw the same sad, fragile woman. I cried at funerals I had already attended. I nodded and whispered condolences, though my mind was elsewhere, calculating, observing. Every tear I shed, every quiet sob I feigned became a weapon. If he ever suspected I was alive in more than body, he would think I was still broken, still weak, still unaware. That illusion was crucial. I created routines that made me predictable. I visited the cemetery at the same time every week, checking the soil with a casual hand as if still grieving. I walked past his old favorite cafe, occasionally glancing at the street he might pass. On the outside I was still mourning. On the inside I catalogued every detail, patterns, habits, vulnerabilities. Legal preparation was next. I consulted lawyers under the guise of settling his estate, learning everything about property ownership, life insurance claims, and financial rights. Every form I filled, every record I accessed, I did carefully, making sure he wouldn't notice. The law would be my silent ally, a sword hidden in plain sight, ready for the moment I needed it most. I even set up a network of observers, friends who owed favors, discreet inquiries, monitoring of his digital footprint, emails, social media, banking notifications, travel alerts. Nothing was too small. Every anomaly became a clue, every movement a signal. I didn't just watch him. I understood him. He had underestimated the depth of my attention. The most important weapon, however, was patience. I knew he expected me to react emotionally, to expose my feelings in ways that would make me vulnerable. But I did not. Each day I controlled myself, refining my strategy, letting his sense of safety grow. He walked through life thinking I was broken, thinking I had no idea that false confidence would be his downfall. I discovered more than just his survival. He had begun building a new life, a carefully constructed existence that excluded me entirely. Bank accounts in false names, small properties purchased quietly, emails to people who believed he had died. The depth of his deceit stunned me, yet strengthened my resolve. He had faked death to erase me from existence, but he had created a world of lies that I could now use against him. I practiced silence like a meditation. I never spoke of my discoveries. I never hinted at suspicion. When friends asked how I was coping, I smiled softly, a widow still in mourning. Every conversation was a rehearsal of innocence. The more ordinary I appeared, the more dangerous I became. Then came the psychological phase. I began leaving traces, subtle hints that someone was observing, someone who knew. A forgotten object slightly moved, a quiet knock on a door. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven, just the seed of doubt planted in his mind. He began to second-guess himself. wondering if his careful plans were truly invisible. Fear, I learned, could be cultivated silently. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots, photos, receipts, copies of messages, bank statements, all indexed, all dated. When the time came, there would be no question, no escape. Every lie he had built was a thread I could pull, unraveling his entire existence. And through it all, I changed internally. Grief had sharpened into focus. Betrayal had transformed into a calm, calculated fire. I was no longer the woman who had answered a stranger's call in panic. I was an observer, a strategist, a silent force gathering power while appearing powerless. By the end of the 4th month, I had everything I needed. Not just evidence, but timing, strategy, psychological leverage. The world still saw a widow struggling to move on, unaware, fragile. The man who had faked his death, confident that I would crumble, could not have imagined the quiet empire I had built in secrecy. I whispered to myself that night in the darkness of our empty home. You wanted me gone. You thought I would vanish into grief. But I've been here. Watching. Learning. Preparing. I smiled, a small, dangerous curve of lips. He had chosen to play God with my life. He had assumed grief would destroy me. He was wrong. The final step was simple. Wait for him to make the first mistake. Confidence, arrogance, routine. All of it would betray him. And when it did, I would be ready, unseen, unshaken, unstoppable. Patience was the cruelest but most powerful weapon in my arsenal. I had learned to wield it perfectly. And when the time came, his world, built on lies, carefully orchestrated deception, and the illusion of safety, would collapse. He had faked his death to escape me, but he hadn't realized one truth. I had never truly been powerless. I was ready. The day finally came when all my preparation could be put into motion. I had watched him for months, collected every piece of evidence, traced every step of his fabricated life, and calculated the perfect moment to strike. He believed he was untouchable, that his lies were sealed behind the perfect mask of a widow who had crumbled in grief. How little he knew. I chose the setting carefully. It had to be public enough to humiliate him, but controlled enough that I could execute the plan flawlessly. His new apartment complex, the cafe he frequented daily, and his favorite hotel all came under consideration. In the end, it wasn't any of those. It was the place where he would feel the most confident. The office of the law firm handling his new life paperwork. He had been preparing documents, signing under false identities, and creating the illusion that he had erased me completely. That was his hubris, and it would be his undoing. I arrived early, dressed impeccably, the picture of composure. Black attire, minimal jewelry, hair tied back neatly. The kind of elegance that commands attention without drawing suspicion. I was calm, calculated. Every step I took had been rehearsed mentally hundreds of times. I had a briefcase containing copies of everything he had done, emails, bank records, property transfers, hotel receipts, even photos of him pretending to be someone else. Every piece told the story of his deception. I waited in the lobby, observing him from a distance. He didn't notice me at first. He was preoccupied, smug, reviewing papers with his lawyer. Confidence radiated from him like heat from a fire. That confidence was dangerous because it was precisely what would make him careless. I took a deep breath and my mind ran through the plan one last time. Step 1. Plant doubt. He had to know, even subtly, that someone was aware. I sent a discreet message to his assistant earlier that morning, hinting that discrepancies in his accounts had been discovered. Just enough to make him slightly nervous but not enough to suspect me. The seed was planted. Step 2. The evidence. I stepped into the office, moving with calm authority. Heads turned. I was the widow they had mourned, the fragile woman who supposedly couldn't manage life without him, but they saw a different aura now. A presence. I handed my briefcase to the lead attorney with a polite smile. I think you need to see these documents, I said softly, deliberately emphasizing the word these. He looked up. Shock registered across his face, but quickly vanished into a mask of arrogance. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice low, attempting control. This doesn't concern you anymore. I smiled faintly. It concerns me entirely, I replied, each word measured. Because everything you've built on lies involves me. And the law sees truth very differently than you do. I opened the briefcase and began laying out the evidence, one piece at a time. Emails showing his identity fraud, bank withdrawals under false names, property transactions excluding me, documents proving he had faked his death. Every paper was deliberate, undeniable, crushing. Each item I presented was a hammer hitting the wall of his fabricated life. The room fell silent. Lawyers, clerks, even his assistants stared in disbelief. He realized, piece by piece, that the world he had meticulously constructed was collapsing before him. His face went pale. His confident posture crumpled into tension. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, trying to find a way out, a loophole, any escape. There was none. Step 3: the confrontation. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply looked him in the eyes, cold and unwavering, and said, "You thought I would disappear. You thought grief would blind me. You faked your death to erase me. But I've been alive, watching, learning, and preparing. Every move you made, I anticipated. Every lie you told, I documented. Every escape you imagined, I blocked." He opened his mouth, stammered, but the words faltered. Panic replaced arrogance. He tried to reach for excuses, explanations, lies, but the evidence spoke louder than his voice ever could. The attorneys began questioning him formally, referencing the documents I had supplied. Each answer he gave contradicted his own paper trail. Every attempt at deception failed. The room was no longer his domain. I had taken control. Then came the final blow. I presented a live tracking report, proof that he had recently traveled under a false identity, attempting to manipulate property ownership and avoid legal consequences. His facade crumbled completely. Faces in the room turned toward him, disbelief and judgment clear in every glance. He realized the world he had created to escape responsibility was gone. I closed the briefcase calmly and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You wanted to disappear. You thought you could erase me. But I've been alive. And I am relentless." The room erupted in murmurs. Lawyers confirmed the evidence. Phones were called. Statements were taken. His empire of lies collapsed in front of him, public, undeniable, inescapable. He had tried to control life itself by pretending to die. But control is never guaranteed when the one you betray refuses to be powerless. As I walked out of the office, I felt the first real sense of freedom in months. No tears, no anger, only satisfaction. Justice had been served. He would face consequences legally, socially, financially. His new life was over. And mine? Mine was only beginning. I had taken months of silence, patience, and observation to turn betrayal into power. And in the end it had worked flawlessly. He had faked his death to escape me, but in doing so, he underestimated the one thing that would destroy him, me. I stepped into the sunlight, unshaken, victorious. The man who had tried to erase me would never forget the woman who had refused to disappear. The final confrontation didn't need shouting. I had already dismantled his world. Legally, socially, financially. He sat across from me, pale, broken, powerless. The man who faked his death to erase me now realized he had underestimated the one person he thought would vanish quietly. I watched him try to justify, to bargain, to manipulate, but it was too late. Every lie, every deceit, every hidden identity had been exposed. Lawyers confirmed the evidence. Banks froze his accounts. Property transfers were reversed. Friends who once believed him now saw the truth. His new life crumbled like sand slipping through desperate fingers. I didn't gloat. I simply stood tall, calm, in full control. The fear, the shock, the humiliation, it belonged to him. Every plan he had meticulously executed to escape me had become his own trap. And as I walked away, leaving him to face the consequences, I whispered to myself, smiling with cold satisfaction. He faked his death to escape me. I stayed alive to destroy the lie. And now he knows what it truly means to lose everything to the one he tried to erase.